let you know. So this is the text of a speech. It is a speech given by a man named Bill Moyers. Okay, Bill Moyers isn't going to use his own name, but just so you know who he is. He's an excellent speaker. He used to have his own interview show. He interviewed all sorts of people from all sorts of philosophies, walks of life, and so on, and was really, really well known throughout the States. He's at a conference in 2003 in Washington, D.C., for the conference of Take Back America. Now, you might think that that's a right-wing Republican thing, but actually, no, it's a left-wing liberal thing. So just so that you know. Yes, they've changed their name now, but in any case, they gave him an award. And so this is the speech that he gave at that time. Could you let me know when I've got about 12 or 13 minutes? So that I can just do this and I don't have to worry? Okay. All ready? Thank you for this award and for this occasion. I don't deserve either, but as George Burns said, I have arthritis and I don't deserve that either. Tomorrow is my 69th birthday, and I cannot imagine a better present than this award or a better party than your company. 53 years ago tomorrow, on my 16th birthday, I went to work for the daily newspaper in the small East Texas town where I grew up. It was a good place to be a cub reporter, small enough to navigate, but big enough to keep me busy and learning something every day. I soon had a stroke of luck. Some of the old-timers were on vacation or out sick, and I got assigned to cover what came to be known as the Housewives' Rebellion. 15 women in my hometown decided not to pay the Social Security withholding tax for their domestic workers. They argued that Social Security was unconstitutional, that imposing it was taxation without representation, and that, here's my favorite part, requiring us to collect the tax is no different from requiring us to collect the garbage. They hired themselves a lawyer, none other than Martin Dees, the famous and former congressman, best known, or worst known, for his work as head of the House Committee on Un-American Activities in the 30s and 40s. He was no more effective at defending rebellious women than he had been protecting against communist subversives. And eventually, the women wound up holding their noses and paying the tax. The stories I wrote for my local paper were picked up and moved on the Associated Press wire. One day, the managing editor called me over and pointed to the AP ticker beside his desk. Moving across the wire was a notice citing one Bill Moyers and the paper for the reporting we had done on the rebellion. That hooked me, and in one way or another, after a detour through seminary and then into politics and even government for a spell, I've been covering the class war ever since. Those women in Marshall, Texas were its advance guard. They were not bad people. They were regulars at church. Their children were my friends. Many of them were active in community affairs. Their husbands were pillars of the business and professional class in town. They were respectable and upstanding citizens all. So it took me a while to figure out what had brought on that spasm of reactionary rebellion. It came to me one day, much later. They simply couldn't see beyond their own prerogatives. Fiercely loyal to their families, to their clubs, charities, congregations. Fiercely loyal, in other words, to their own kind. They narrowly defined membership in democracy to include only people like them. The women who washed and ironed their laundry, wiped their children's bottoms, made their husbands' beds, cooked their family meals. These women too would grow old and frail, sick and decrepit, lose their husbands, face the ravages of time alone, all with nothing to show from their years of labor but the crease in their brow and the knots on their knuckles. So be it. Even on the distaff side of laissez-faire, security was personal, not social. And what injustice existed this side of heaven would no doubt be redeemed beyond the pearly gates. God would surely be just to the poor once they got past Judgment Day. In one way or another, this is the oldest story in America. The struggle to determine whether we the people is a spiritual idea embedded in a political reality, one nation, indivisible, or merely a charade masquerading as piety and manipulated by the powerful and privileged to sustain their own way of life at the expense of others. Let me make it clear that I don't harbor any idealized notion of politics and democracy. I worked for Lyndon Johnson, remember? Nor do I romanticize the people. You should read my mail or listen to the vitriol virtually spat at my answering machine. I understand what the politician meant who said of the Texas House of Representatives, "If you think these guys are bad, you should see their constituents." But there is nothing idealized or romantic about the difference between a society whose arrangements roughly serve all its citizens and one whose institutions have been converted into a stupendous fraud. That difference can be the difference between democracy and oligarchy. Look at our history. All of us know that the American Revolution ushered in what one historian called the age of democratic revolutions. For the Great Seal of the United States, the new Congress went all the way back to the Roman poet Virgil. Novus ordo seclorum. A new age now begins. Page Smith reminds us that their ambition was not merely to free themselves from dependence and subordination to the crown, but to inspire people everywhere to create agencies of government and forms of common social life that would offer greater dignity and hope to the exploited and suppressed. To those, in other words, who had been the losers. Not surprisingly, however, the winners often resisted. In the early years of constitution making in the states and in the emerging nation, aristocrats wanted a government of property gentlemen to keep the scales tilted in their favor. Battling on the other side were moderates, and even those radicals harboring the extraordinary idea of letting all white males have the vote. Luckily, the weapons were words and ideas, and not bullets. Through compromise and conciliation, the draftsmen achieved a constitution of checks and balances that is now the oldest in the world. Even as the revolution of democracy that inspired it remains a tempestuous adolescent whose destiny is still up for grabs. For all the rhetoric about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it took a civil war to free the slaves and another 100 years to invest their freedom with meaning. Women only gained the right to vote in my mother's time. New ages don't arrive overnight or without blood, sweat, and tears. You know this. You are the heirs of one of the country's great traditions, the progressive movement that started late in the 19th century and remade the American experience piece by piece until it peaked in the last third of the 20th century. I call it the progressive movement for lack of a more precise term. Its aim was to keep the blood pumping through the veins of democracy when others were ready to call in the mortician. Progressives exalted and extended the original American Revolution. They spelled out new terms of partnership between the people and their rulers. And they kindled a flame that lit some of the most prosperous decades in modern history, not only here, but in aspiring democracies everywhere, especially those of Western Europe. Step back with me to the curtain raiser, the founding convention of the People's Party, better known as the Populists, way back in 1892. The members were mainly cotton and wheat farmers from the recently reconstructed South, so after the Civil War, and the newly settled Great Plains. They had come on hard times, driven to the wall by falling prices for their crops on the one hand, and racking interest rates, freight charges, and supply costs on the other. This all happening in the midst of a booming and growing industrial America. They were angry, and their platform, issued deliberately on the 4th of July, pulled no punches. We meet, it said, in the midst of a nation brought to the verge of moral, political, and material ruin. Corruption dominates the ballot box, state legislatures, and the Congress, and touches even the bench. The newspapers are largely subsidized or muzzled, public opinion silenced. The fruits of the toil of millions are boldly stolen to build up colossal fortunes for a few. It sounds a little bit like today, doesn't it? That's it for the first half of the speech.